This episode is brought to you by FedEx. FedEx knows running a small business is hard enough without the hassle of shipping. That's why there's FedEx One Rate. With FedEx One Rate, you can ship your holiday packages cheaper than the post office for as low as $14.50 for small boxes. Visit FedEx.com/OneRate for details. Exclusions apply. Valid through January 19th, 2025. FedEx One Rate. 2-day retail shipping, one flat rate.
I want to next turn to one of the world's leading authorities on monetary policy, a good personal friend, but just an expert on finance and how money works and on the Federal Reserve. She is my nominee to be the next Federal Reserve Board chairman when we finally get rid of Jerome Powell. I'm talking about the great Judy Shelton. She is also a senior fellow at the Independent Institute. Judy, I hope you had a wonderful Christmas, and thanks so much for coming on.
Sure did, and what a great pleasure to talk with you, Steve. Thanks so much.
So a lot to talk about, Judy, in the area of the Federal Reserve Board. Let's talk about what the Fed has done in this past year, because I'm not too happy about it, frankly, and I think that a lot of people are confused about the rate cuts, why they did it, when they did it, and how would you assess what has happened with our monetary policy over the last year? I'm a little bit worried about whether prices may be rising again a little bit, but how do you see it?
Well, I think the problem is the Fed just can't get its story straight.
That's right.
It has dueling frameworks, and its old favorite is the idea that the best way to fight inflation is to ratchet up interest rates and effectively punish small and medium-sized businesses, because the Fed says if we can curtail economic activity, that will reduce demand, and that'll bring down inflation. The problem is whose economic activity is being curtailed, not the federal government's. The federal
That's for
government,
sure.
they're just a busy little bee, and they're out there with fiscal transfers and subsidies and all kinds of unnecessary expenditures, and they're the ones fanning the flames of inflation. So the Fed comes in as Nurse Ratched and says to punish the inflation, let's take it out on those who don't deserve it, the real producers in the economy, the ones who are the manufacturers, the small and medium businesses who hire people and create the goods and services that would increase supply, which would be the best way to bring down inflation. No, let's punish them and allow government to keep going on. The government is immune from the cost of capital. They don't care what it costs. So this has been the Fed's story right up until September. And then suddenly everything changed. And now they introduced a change of procedure. Here they've been sitting for 8 meetings on this pause at their highest rate in years. And then they go with the jumbo cut in interest rates, because now it's not just labor markets, because it turned out that was just a panicky move. There really was no problem with the labor market, at least at the levels that the Fed looks at. But they decided that they were going to recalibrate. And I'll tell you, I understand we see the rise of inflation a little bit. The Wall Street Journal had a powerful editorial saying, why are they cutting it all? But I welcome this cut. I will take it on behalf of those small and medium-sized companies that have been frozen out and unable to reach their full potential, because for them, high borrowing costs are a real obstacle. So I will take it. But what I don't like is the Fed now has never been concerned about the fiscal situation, but now Chair Powell is talking about the need to model the impact of policies under the incoming Trump administration.
That's terrible. This really, I find troubling, because for one thing, a lot of the models that they're using are saying that Trump's policies will hurt the economy and cause inflation, which seems to me, Judy, I'm talking to Judy Shelton, by the way, her latest book, she's written many, is the latest one As Good as Gold?
It is.
That's
that came out in September.
Yeah, I love that. So it's fantastic. And I'll tell you a kind of cute little story that Judy and I have been have been vying for who's number one on Amazon Business and Economics, because I have a book out called The Trump Economic Miracle, and it came out at just about the same time. And, 1 week she's at the top, the next week we're on the top, and we kept jiggling back and forth. So I guess, Judy, people have to buy both books, As Good as Gold by Judy Shelton.
Amazon is recommending that now. It shows a picture of your cover and my cover, and it says often bought together. So I'm very complimented by that.
Yeah, and I'm honored by that too. So I'm talking to Judy Shelton. She's a financial expert and an expert on the Fed. Now, the problem, I think, partly is Jerome Powell, because he is not really an economist. I don't think he's more of a lawyer than an economist. I don't think he really completely understands how the economy works, quite frankly. And I am concerned that he thinks tax cuts, Judy, will cause inflation. And I've never seen that. I mean, when Reagan cut taxes, the inflation rate went down. When Trump cut taxes, the inflation rate went down. Where do they come up with these ideas?
Well, first, let's say the economists on staff at the Federal Reserve are registered Democrats, 10 to 1 compared to Republicans.
Let me hold on, Judy. Time out. I want to say that statistic again because it is so important. And you're quite right to call them out on this. We had something in the hotline about this 10 to 1 ratio of the folks who are working at the Fed who are supposed to be politically independent, right, Judy? And they are Democrats. That doesn't sound like a lot of diversity to me.
No, I'd say that's pretty one note with regard to political philosophy, and it's one that favors government management of the economy. And you're right. I mean, tax cuts, the one thing that Chair Powell has never paid attention to is the fiscal situation. He always before said he takes it as given. And now he actually, in that last press conference, said that, well, we're thinking ahead about the potential impact of these policies. And that I found that the most ominous comment that was made during the Fed's press conference, because the irony is when the Fed increased rates 4 times in 2018 under Powell, when President Trump was achieving record low unemployment rates, excellent growth, increased productivity, and just a terrific economy. And admittedly, President Trump was starting to jawbone the Fed and saying, what are you doing? Why are you raising rates when you haven't even hit your 2% inflation target?
So well, I find it, no, they don't have a very good record at hitting that rate. It's like, a blind man throwing darts at a dartboard. But I wanted to add another thing, that they seem to think that, cutting taxes will create more demand, but they don't seem to understand that if you cut tax rates on businesses, their incentive to hire more people and to expand their operations and increase the supply of goods and services. When that happens, as Arthur Laffer says, if the economy produces more apples, the price of apples goes down. I don't think that's a very simple principle, but I don't think Jerome Powell and these 400 PhD economists understand that.
It's absolutely amazing, because we know from experience and from the logic you just went through, it's free market logic, that economic growth and low unemployment are not inflationary. That's how you increase supply. That's what causes relative to demand prices to come down. What's amazing to me is Chair Powell has actually stated publicly that the Federal Reserve cannot do very much on supply. So they use these powerful tools to hit demand. And what they're also missing, I think, is that a lot of corporate borrowers are still able to stay in business. They pay those high rates. And then guess what happens? That becomes a cost of business for them that goes to the bottom line. And that becomes part of the retail cost that consumers have to pay. So that's contributing to the higher prices, and the high interest income that people are receiving is also making those people wealthier with more money to burn. And so he neglects to see the inflationary aspects of having high interest rates. But for me, the worst part of it, I mean, I want interest rates to be real. I want them to reflect supply and demand. And I have said for 2 years, the 4.25 to 4.5 is not a bad place to be if you're going to have a 2% inflation target. That gives you a real rate of return. Traditionally around 2+%. You need that. Zero rates are no good. So you need that. But now for the Fed to sort of say, we're now keeping a close eye and we're going to be watching to see what the Trump administration does, is it's like they're loaded for bear so they can come in and undermine it. And what I hope is that the supply side program, and I fully expect this, will be so successful in increasing productivity and output and contribute to supply that the Fed can just become irrelevant. Let them just stand aside, be less political, less prominent, and less powerful.
So a couple of last questions, Judy. I'm talking to Judy Shelton, who's one of the top monetary economists in the country. Her book is called As Good as Gold. I get a lot of calls from our listeners over the last year or two, Judy, about something called modern monetary policy. And I try to explain it, why it's wrong to my listeners, and I think some of them get it, but I'd love it if you could explain what modern monetary theory is and why it's so wrong.
Well, yes, modern monetary theory is the brainchild of Stephanie Kelton, and the interpretation is that deficits don't matter. So unfortunately, it has held great appeal for the people on Capitol Hill and in the Biden White House, because if deficits don't matter, then they can just keep deficit spending forever. Right. And now what we're seeing, our salvation...
Wait, time out. So they're saying like we can just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and it's not going to have a negative effect?
They're saying we can keep borrowing, and it's not going to have a negative effect.
Jeez.
And then if inflation arises, which they see as just a remote possibility, but if it happens, then their solution is increased taxes.
Oh, my God. So tell me why it's wrong.
Well, I think it's wrong because it sets up government not just to be in control, but abusively so.
Right.
And they're saying really that only the United States can do it because the United States prints the money that effectively everyone has to acknowledge as the real money.
Right. And
so there's no need to deny ourselves all the gifts of fiscal transfers because we can just keep pushing it out. I think what we're coming to realize is there is such a thing as fiscal unsustainability. And we see it creeping into the long-term bond yields. Yes. We see it as just sort of a hopelessness. And if we're going to re-empower the private sector, we just have to cut the size of government. So there's a dual benefit. It's not just a financial accounting benefit to cutting the size of spending. Yeah. It also has to do with the relative apportioning of power in our economy. We need to reduce the government's power and instead give a renaissance to the private sector and entrepreneurship.
Right. Well, if anything good comes out of the Biden administration, I hope it is that modern monetary theory is a complete lie, and it is a path to the poorhouse. And shame on Joe Biden. It's almost like he wanted an excuse to spend money, and he found these modern monetary policies who said, go ahead and spend as much as you want. Go ahead and borrow as much as you want. And folks, we borrowed $7 trillion, and that didn't work out so well. Last question, Judy, we've just got about a minute and a half left, is you have endorsed an idea that I think is so interesting, and I've been talking a lot about it to my economics friends, and everybody says, that's brilliant. And this is the idea you've been floating about a gold-backed bond, a gold-backed federal bond. And I like that idea, and explain to our listeners in our last 80 seconds how that would work.
I'd really love to see President Trump initiate this one specific idea. We have 261 million ounces of gold worth about $700 billion that we are carrying on our books as worth only $11 billion because it's priced at the rate when we ended the Bretton Woods system. So it's priced at a rate of $42 per ounce of gold, not $2,700. And I think we could capture a windfall profit by using that gold as specific collateral for a 50-year bond that could be redeemed in either gold or dollars, either the face amount of the bond at maturity or a pre-promised amount of gold for bond holders. And I would like the Trump administration to launch this. I've called them Treasury Trust bonds. Let's call them Trump Treasury bonds and launch them on July 4th, 2026 to mature on July 4th, 2076 to show the U.S. is still standing and to serve as a marker that we're making the dollar literally as good as gold. So as we cut spending and go to sound finances, let's also reform the Fed and go for sound money.
Boy, is that a great, great, great thought for the year 2025. Judy Shelton, you're a national treasure. Appreciate you coming on.
Eden Memorial Chapels understands Jewish funerals can take many forms. Some are Orthodox, while others are more conservative or of a Reformed nature. There's no one better. With services close to all New York and New Jersey cemeteries, Eden Memorial Chapels offer fair and balanced pricing and can provide easy transfer of you and your loved ones to Israel. While you're grieving, they're here to take care of all the details so that you deal with less bureaucracy and have more peace of mind. Go to EdenMemorial.com. That's EdenMemorial.com.